Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a Q&A episode, and I have three questions I want to dive into. But first, before I go into that, I just want to go over a few ways you can help support the podcast. First, if you found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find this podcast. Next, I have my free masterclass on body recomp and nutrition periodization. So I go in the body recomp masterclass, I go over what it is, how to do it, just a step-by-step guide there for how I help clients with a body recomp. And then with nutrition periodization, I go over each phase, what we do, how to set it up, what your macros should be, how to make adjustments, common mistakes. And both of these links are in the show notes, so you can check them out there. And again, they're completely free. Next, if you haven't yet, give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff. That's where I'm most active on social media. And I'm always a DM away if you have any questions on anything I've gone over in this podcast or anything like that. So with that out of the way, let's dive into today's questions. So the first question I have is, let me pull it up. Okay, so given training intensity is in the right place, training intensity being making sure you have the right effort. Again, this, isn't necessarily like you have to push yourself to the max every single time, but we're at least training close enough to failure. And this is for muscle growth. So that's what we would say training intensity is. Which lever would you increase first for building? And I'm assuming building muscle. So that's what I'm going to take it as. It's training versus calories. What would be that next lever? Okay, I talk a lot about for building muscle. We need to make sure that effort's there because really nothing else is very important if our training intensity isn't there. So that's like the main thing. And again, that just being you pushing it, not necessarily to absolute failure. You're at least putting in the effort consistently, and it's enough to elicit muscle growth, right? You're not going into the gym and just going through the motions every single time and never progressing or anything like that. That's what we're talking about there. So what would be the next lever that I would pull to make sure is in check? And I do think it would be calories. I would go calories. And the big thing is just making sure you aren't in too large of a deficit, because we know that as the calorie deficit gets larger, so that being how quickly you lose weight, when it's the larger it is, so the quicker you lose weight, the more you drop per week, that's where you start to see decrements in terms of adding muscle, and to the point to where if it's too large, you may even lose muscle in the process. So definitely calories would be the next lever that I would pull there to make sure that you're just not in too large of a deficit. Now, in saying that, some people, they hear, oh, you can't build muscle in a deficit. And that's not the case. There are certain conditions where you can build muscle in a deficit, but those, I'll go over what those are, but the longer that you are in a deficit, the more muscle you grow, like the less likely, the slower that's going to happen. So for some people, this is just making sure you're not in too large of a deficit. So people that can build some muscle in a deficit are going to be people who are overweight, right? They have a lot of body fat. They can build some muscle in a deficit. People who are new to training, they haven't really trained in general. They haven't really lifted weights at any period of time. And then somebody who's coming back from like a long layoff of training, right? So maybe you have trained for a while, but you were injured or you just couldn't train for months on end. You come back, you're going to see some recomp and you're able to build muscle in a calorie deficit. Next, one that people don't really think about is maybe you are somebody who's been training for a while and you just have your nutrition's not great. Like you don't hit your macro, like you have no balance of macros are all over the place. Maybe protein is super low. You just really just eat for enjoyment. You don't really focus on like nutrition for like body composition, right? That's somebody that could potentially, if they improve that, they could build some muscle in deficit. Maybe you have poor lifestyle, right? So sleep is terrible, stress management, you just have a ton of stress. If we start to get those things improved, that gives you some room here for recomp. But even training too, like just because you've been weight training for a couple years or longer, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're somebody who's, oh, I've been weight training, so I can't build muscle in deficit. If you're somebody who has had training protocols that are geared towards building muscle, like you're just maybe doing more high intensity circuit type training, more like group class style, or maybe it's like very like powerlifting based or like CrossFit style, which again, I'm not saying you can't build muscle training that way. It's just probably not the most optimal way to build muscle, right? You take somebody like that, and maybe you take somebody who has been doing CrossFit style training for a while and you put them on a hypertrophy style program, and maybe you get them, maybe their deficit isn't super large, maybe it's a little bit smaller, and maybe you get them focusing on better sleep, and boom, they're going to be able to recomp, right? They're going to be in a good spot because you're just putting their body in a better position to drop body fat and build muscle, right? And a lot of people think they're intermediate or advanced because they've been training for 5+ years, when from a hypertrophy perspective, they're actually not at that level, right? They're closer to beginner. So those are levers that we can pull there to build muscle in a deficit. And so again, the next thing being, the more muscle you have, the less body fat you have, the better your protocols are with all those things I talked about, the smaller that deficit needs to be, up until the point to where at some point you will have to not be in a deficit to build muscle, right? So that's the other thing is for some people, making sure you aren't in a deficit at all. Again, the better your protocols have been, the more muscle you have, the leaner you are, the longer you've been in a deficit, the more likely it's like, hey, we need to get you out of a deficit to build muscle. But I think calories are the next lever that I'm going to pull, because you could do all the weight training in the world, but if you're not giving your body enough energy, it doesn't matter. It's not going to build as much muscle or build muscle at all, depending on how large your deficit is. I also want to clarify one thing here too, is that it's on a spectrum. I already mentioned that the larger the deficit and whatnot there with that. What I wanted to say is because you can build muscle in a deficit doesn't mean that you're going to maximize it either. Again, I think if you were to compare a small deficit, like we just talked about there, to like maintenance, being closer to maintenance is probably going to be better for muscle growth. And then we take it even further, being at maintenance, again, you're still going to be able to build muscle, but you're probably going to be in the best spot to build the most muscle possible by being in a small surplus. So it's not like it's either or, where it's like, hey, you're in a small deficit. Okay, you get just as much muscle growth as being at maintenance or in a small surplus. And then even maintenance, it's you're still probably leaving a little bit on the table, but we're talking small amounts here, and it's not anything that's going to be this like massive difference, at least initially there with that. So hopefully that gives you some idea. I would say volume would be another one that I would consider here, because you could be training close to failure, right, consistently. You could be at maintenance calories or a small surplus or just avoiding a large deficit. But if you're not doing enough training volume, like you're just doing one set per week, it's okay. One set per week for muscle group, you're going to be missing out on some muscle growth, right? So I'd say volume is a close second there, but I just want calories because, again, if you're not consuming enough food, not giving your body the resources it needs, muscle growth is going to be lower on the priority list there. But volume is key, in that too little volume and you're not going to grow muscle either, even though you train to failure, even though the intensity is there. So volume is a very close second, because we just want to make sure we're not going too low volume there with that. Again, you could be like, hey, my intensity's there, I'm doing one set per week, I'm in a surplus, and that's okay. Yeah, you're still probably not going to build as much muscle as you would want because you're not doing enough volume. So volume is a very close second there on that. All right, so second question is, okay, so I know you talk a lot about stress and how it can impact a body recomp and can impact fat gain. How exactly does that happen? And so I wanted to go over just how stress can indirectly impact your body composition and fat gain. There's the assumption that stress is just automatically going to lead to fat gain, right? You're just going to store belly fat. You're just going to gain fat because you're stressed. And that's not necessarily the case, but it can make it more likely to happen, and it can make it tougher to lose body fat in this process. And so I think it's important to state before I dive into this, the goal isn't to reduce all stress. We don't want to sit there and be like this like monk that just has no stress whatsoever. You just meditate all day. Again, that's not feasible, right? But we do want to try to limit and reduce unnecessary stressors and find better ways to manage your stress. So again, it's not completely getting rid of all stress, because we do want some stress, but we also need to make sure that we want to try to limit and reduce unnecessary stressors. And one other thing that I want to mention here too is a lot of people think of stress as work stress, relationship stress, or hey, that was a stressful thing for me. And then they separate it from training and nutrition stress, right? Training stress being obviously adaptations, right? Any adaptation you're trying to make to your body, that is a stressor on the body. It's a good stressor, but because it still is a stressor on the body, it still falls within the same bucket, even though it's a good stressor on the body. We can't do too much, and that good stress can become maybe not the greatest stressor on the body if these other things aren't in place. And then nutrition, like what would be nutrition stress? That would be like if you're in a calorie deficit, again, that's a stressor on the body. Even a surplus is going to be a stressor on the body, because you're constantly trying to adapt there with that. These are stressors on the body, and calorie deficit probably being, depending on how large the deficit, I would say either way, anytime you're trying to change your body, like that is some stressor on the body. But people separate that, okay? They think that's training stress, that's in a separate bucket, but it all falls in the same bucket, and we only have so much we can recover from. Some people genetically have a smaller bucket, some people have a larger bucket, and they can handle a lot more stress. Some people can handle less. Also, there's things that we can do to increase our bucket as well too a little bit. Again, good sleep, good programming, proper nutrition, like these are all things that can also increase that stress bucket and what we can handle and how much our body can handle. But if we're not finding ways to reduce some of that stress and lower that stress in the bucket, it's going to start to overflow, and that's where you're going to start to run into some issues. So I just thought it was important to note that, like, stress it can be a lot of different things. And a lot of times people don't think of training and nutrition stress as a stressor. An example of this would be my client. He's a high achiever, right? He's got a good job, stressful job, high demanding job. He has kids. He also likes to be very active. He likes to mountain bike. He wants to build as much muscle as possible as well too, and maximize his body composition. So he just has a lot going on, right? And so for him, the higher the stress is at work, when his sleep isn't great, that's going to lower how much he can recover from. But if he's also trying to do a lot of training, and on top of it, certain periods of time, we do run a calorie deficit, these are all things that we have to watch out for him. So again, he makes a ton of healthy choices. He has a good job and everything like that. But he has a high stress load, and we have to be able to manage that. Otherwise, things are just going to be tougher for him, and his body's just going to be less receptive to change and whatnot. I want to talk about how high stress can impact fat gain here. First, it leads to cravings for more calorie dense foods, right? We know that just by itself, stress isn't going to just be, okay, hey, you're going to gain body fat, right? It's more indirect than that, right? And so the first thing is it leads to cravings for more calorie dense foods. High stress usually leads to cravings for high foods and foods high in calories. So think like combinations of like fats and carbs, right? These tasty foods. Calorie dense foods make it tough to eat in the correct calorie amount for your goals because it makes it easier to consume extra calories throughout your day, which can lead to a calorie surplus. If we have we have a lot of stress going on, we have a lot of things going on, we're not taking time to manage it. You can probably think about times when you've been most stressful. You want those tasty foods, and those are just easy to overeat. And so it makes it easier to get into a calorie surplus there with that. It's not that stress automatically leads to fat gain. It's easier to overeat at that point. Also, when cortisol is high and we have this high stress and we're not finding ways to manage it, it can lead to an increased risk of fat gain around the midsection. So chronic stress leads to high cortisol, which has been linked to increased abdominal fat, right? This is that visceral fat. Again, this could be a thing where you make a ton of great choices. The stress is pretty high. And then it's like you're leaning out, but it's like your midsection is just being very just stubborn, right? And part of this could be stress there with that. The visceral fat leads to an increasing midsection, but also poses significant health risk, being closely associated with cardiovascular diseases and insulin resistance, right? So this is where having extra higher levels of stress can impact your body composition here, especially around the midsection, right? And that's where a lot of people really feel like their body fat is stubborn. So you take somebody, again, you got family stress, you got relationship stress, money stress, job stress, all these things, they're all weighing down on you. And if you're not finding healthy ways to manage this stress or to reduce stressors, you could be fighting an uphill battle here, even though you're making good nutrition choices, training, etc. High stress can lead to poor sleep. So stress can wreak havoc on your sleep quality and duration, and then poor sleep further exacerbates stress, leading to the issues mentioned earlier, right? So it's like that vicious cycle there where higher stress can lead to poor sleep, leads to all these other things as well too. Lower motivation, worse decision making, higher likelihood of wanting tasty foods there with that. Poor sleep can also lead to lower energy levels, making it less likely to exercise. And again, we have those cravings for calorie dense foods, and it does impact muscle gain and fat loss. So now we're looking at it from a body comp standpoint. Higher stress can lead to lower motivation and poor decision making. It can deplete your mental resources, making it harder to stick to workout routines and healthy eating habits. Your stress levels are high, and it's, man, now I just don't want to go to the gym. I don't want to train. I don't want to make good food choices. And this is going to lead down to things tipping in a calories energy surplus, right? You're bringing in more food because you want those tasty foods, but now you're also not exercising as well. And again, you're making worse choices because you just have so much stress. This reduction in willpower and cognitive function often leads to clients skipping workouts and opting for convenience foods over balanced meals. I had a client, luckily he's on a better shift now, but he was a nurse and he was working overnights, and these were all things that we were seeing. And on top of it, he wasn't great at managing his stress, and he just didn't understand why he would have a couple of weeks where he would do really well, and then things would just fall out of place. And a lot of it was because we weren't working. He was letting these like stressors build up. He wasn't getting good sleep. And then on top of it, he wasn't managing his stress in a healthy way and reducing unnecessary stressors. And that's led to poor decision making, him craving certain foods and whatnot. And since we've really worked on stress management for him, he's seen like a just complete 180. Now, this was before we started doing that, before he switched to a better shift, but he all of a sudden just saw his weight just start to trend down after just months on end of not seeing that. Next, it can negatively impact gut health. Chronic stress can affect gut health, leading to issues like increased gut permeability and alterations in the gut microbiota. This can influence nutrient absorption and immune function, potentially leading to inflammation and further contributing to weight gain and difficulty in managing body comp, right? So now we're looking at gut health issues, and this is going to impact inflammation, right? And that's not going to be great from a body comp standpoint and sticking with your fat loss phase there with that. So again, it can also impact your gut health. It can impair recovery from training. High stress levels can interfere with the body's ability to recover after exercise. And we know how cortisol can impair tissue repair and muscle growth by reducing protein synthesis and potentially increasing protein breakdown. Some cortisol is good, but if it's chronically high and we always have it there, that's where it can become an issue. I see this in clients who have high stress levels doing more training and more intense training. Is how they will typically handle stress, right? So you see these people that have they live these high stress lifestyles, and the way it's like, hey, what do you do to manage your stress? Why work out? Okay, so now they train intensely to manage that, but that's not the answer, right? Again, we want to reduce the unnecessary stressors and improve your recovery from what you were currently doing before we just added more and just continue to just, oh, hey, my stress reduction is going to exercise. Again, that's just going to lead to more of these issues. All right, so I want to talk about some ways that I have clients manage stress and how we work on this, right? So you know how it can impact your body composition. Again, it can decrease muscle growth. It can increase fat gain. It can mess with your gut health. Even poor gut health can also impact insulin sensitivity, right? So it's just this vicious cycle here. But again, remember, the goal isn't to reduce all stress. We do want to it's okay if we have some stress, but we just want to manage it and find ways to just reduce unnecessary stressors. So again, how do we do this? We maintain the right amount of physical activity and intensity. We don't want to underdo exercise, but we also don't want to overdo it. And we also want to make sure that intensity is in line with our recovery and everything like that. Other ways, do hobbies you enjoy, haven't done in a while. As we get older and we have more stuff to do, we can maybe we end up not doing hobbies that used to bring us joy and really help lower our stress level. So if there is anything like that, look into it and see if there's something that you can add in that you haven't done in a while. Again, anything that can get you out of rumination mode. So calming music, reading, creative work, anything like that, whatever that is for you, anything that can get you out of this rumination mode is going to be super helpful from a stress management perspective. Spending time with loved ones can be a great one. Practicing mindfulness and meditation, again, just taking 10 minutes, 10 minutes, a couple times throughout the day to just slow down and breathe can really go a long way here to help manage stress. Improve overall diet quality, right? So giving your body fuel it needs, the nutrients it needs can really go a long way here in reducing stress, right? If we have high stress and we're also just giving our body, we're drinking to help, we're drinking alcohol to help lower stress. Again, now you're putting more stress on the body there, then your sleep's impacted. But then we're also going with these highly palatable processed foods, again, that could be something there that's not going to help improve your stress. So again, we want to improve our overall diet quality, get more whole foods in the diet. Limit stimulants as well too. If you're just going crazy with caffeine or any stimulant, again, if you have ADHD, I think that can be something there that if you take medication for, that's a stimulant. It's an upper. Again, we want to limit these things. And then you also on top of it have alcohol, then you also have a ton of caffeine on top of it. We just want to be careful here with just giving our body a ton of these stimulants, right? And improve time management skills. So again, improving your time management can really go a long way here to help lower your stress level. So having a game plan, having some sort of game plan for your week can really go a long way here. So again, improving those time management skills and planning ahead can really help you here with this. So hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully that gave you a good idea of how stress can impact your body composition and what you can do about it. Okay, so my last question is, say I only want to max out PRs to 200-pound squat, deadlifts, and such, not go past that weight. Am I still able to gain muscle without adding more weight on each week? So this is a pretty interesting question here. So basically it's like, hey, once I get to this like PR, I just want to sit at that same weight forever. Can I do that? And I would say no. Now, I think you keep the weight the same. This doesn't mean you need to increase weight every single time, but if we think about it again, we need to make sure that in order to build muscle, like the proper intensity needs to be there. Over time, you need to make it tougher and it needs to place some sort of challenge on the body to send that signal to, hey, this is more than we've done in the past and we need to adapt to this. But in saying that, you don't need to necessarily increase weight every single week that you go into the gym. I think that does lead to some issues down the line. So you don't have to do it every single week, but over time, basically what would happen if you did this is it would get to the point to where one, you would obviously fall out of the certain rep range. Like over time, your reps would have to go up, right? Because if it's going to be challenging, you would have to increase reps or sets. But then at that point, you still would have to do more reps over time, because otherwise then you're going to fall out of this getting relatively close to failure. Again, we don't have to go to failure. We at least want the exercise, the set, to be somewhat challenging, right? So if you just stay at the same weight, it's like now all of a sudden maybe the PR was a 1 rep max, and then all of a sudden now you're going to be able to do it for two reps, and then over time it's just going to continue to get easier and easier. And then like for deadlifts or squats, now you're going to have to be doing like sets of 10, and then at some point you're going to have to do sets of 15. So it gets to the point to where it's going to become more of a cardiovascular exercise than it would be actual exercise to build muscle. So again, I just would like be very careful here with this pre-plan. This is what I'm going to do for, or I either add weight or I don't. We need to have some sort of auto regulation and go off of feel, right? But again, I think at some point the exercise would just get so easy that you would have to do so many reps, and at that point it becomes more of a cardiovascular exercise there with that, right? This goes for anything, but you definitely over time would probably want to increase weight. And I followed up with this person, and they said it's from an injury management standpoint. Again, continue. You're always going to have to pay attention to your technique. And it's not like all of a sudden, if you go to 200 to 205, now your injury risk increases a ton. Like, again, over time, you're going to want to probably get closer to 205, then 210, then 215, because it's just going to become so easy there with that. And also understand too, that there are more exercises outside of squats and deadlifts as well too, to build muscle. I just wanted to point that out too, because this is like a question where it's okay. So is that like the only, if you say, hey, if I stay at 200 and I don't want to go any higher on squats, bench, or squat and deadlift and stuff like that, are you not doing other exercises? Because squats and deadlifts can be good for like overall strength and stuff. I don't think they're the greatest muscle building exercises, right? So I think you're already shooting yourself in the foot there from a muscle building perspective. If you're just doing like squats and deadlifts, I think you need to add in other exercises as well too. So, that would be my other thing too, is okay, there are other exercises outside, but in that particular exercise, if you stay at the same weight and you don't ever increase it over time because you want to manage injuries, just understand that I think at a certain point, it's just the reps are going to get so high per set if you need to get the adequate stimulus or intensity there on that, right? So that would be my biggest thing. I think at the end of the day, you're never going to get to a point and be like, all right, I'm done and I'm good to go there. And again, understand too that what are you doing with the other exercises? Because those other exercises I feel are going to give you better return on investment from a muscle building standpoint than like squats and deadlifts. I think a squats and deadlifts is more of the overall strength kind of exercise. And if you like those exercises, I don't think they're the greatest muscle building exercises in the world, but again, they can help with strength. And if you are a power lifter, you do obviously need to do those exercises there with that. So hopefully that was helpful. Let me know if you guys have any questions on this. If you struggle with questions like these, or how do I manage my stress? What do my macros need to be? Do I need to be in a fat loss phase or a muscle gaining phase? Then my free 30-minute strategy call is for you. We dive into your goals, where you want to go, and see how we can get you to those goals and set up a game plan for you. So if you're interested in that, the link to that is in the show notes. And if you ever have any questions on anything, you can always just DM me on Instagram there on that. So that's it for this episode. I'll talk to you guys next time.